What are some company secrets you can now reveal since you don't work for the company anymore? Story 1. I worked at a White Castle from 2000 to 2003. It was clean, nothing super disgusting at all. All of the equipment got a thorough cleaning every 24 hours. The floors were mopped regularly, walls were wiped down, everything. The food was always fresh. If the burgers cooled enough for the buns to get hard, they were trashed. If fries or sides sat under a heat lamp for 15 minutes, they were trashed. We threw away a lot of food. We had to track it all for inventory purposes and filled up a couple of pages a day of stuff we threw out. Even when the bulk of the crew was teenagers, we were really trying to work fast and do a good job. Every year or so, they made us get timed on the griddle by a regional manager. Everyone had to do it. Starting with a clean griddle, you had to fully prepare, box, and bag 30 hamburgers as fast as possible without cutting any corners. I know not all locations are like that, nor are all fast food restaurants, but when I was working there, we did a really good job of everything. Just wanted to share a happy story. Story 2. Applebee's. On the tabletop computers, go to Extras and tap and hold the little white space on the top left of the screen. When it gives a password prompt, it's 4321. Lets you change the table numbers or play games for free. Story 3. When I worked at a certain satellite TV company, they had a value system for customers. You are valued at 1 to 5 stars based on how much you spend and how much they value you as a customer. If you are a higher star value, they will basically do anything to keep you. You'll get a ton of services and equipment for free, and they'll bend over backward to keep you from canceling. If you're just a 1 or 2 star, they don't give a shit. Especially 1 star, because it usually means that you're late all the time or that you don't spend very much. If you call in asking for deals or credits, they won't give them to you. If you threaten to cancel, no one cares. Also, there are special phone lines for people they consider VIPs. They never have to wait on hold, and only special employees are allowed to take the phone calls. Story 4. Viagogo is just corrupt. Straight up. Not a little thing here and there. They are just a criminal company. They will take your money for tickets, even if they have none of those tickets, assuming they will eventually have tickets to sell you. If they don't get them, you get the ticket money back. An example of this was when a guy in the UK bought tickets to the Super Bowl in 2013, booked his air travel, flew to the States, booked his accommodation, was staying in a hotel he paid for, and was calling us every 15 minutes to ask where his tickets were. We were told to lie to him and say someone will meet him at the stadium. We let him know 30 minutes before the game started that he wouldn't be receiving any tickets. Viagogo refunds the ticket cost, but the travel, accommodation, and time wasted? Nothing at all, and they never had the tickets. It's the same thing for festivals. I took loads of calls from people who were told to get to the middle of the wilderness in Eastern Europe for a dance festival, having booked time off work and prepared for a 5-day festival. When they got there, they were told there were never any tickets. Just go home, write off the time off, write off the ticket costs, write off the transport, write off the preparation, and deal with feeling shitty for 5 days because they were ripped off by a company. Except it isn't that simple because now they are in the middle of a field in Eastern Europe for 5 days. The bus that took them there has gone and they have no admittance to the festival, so essentially Viagogo was responsible for just dumping around 100 people in a field in Eastern Europe with no provisions and no way of getting back. Far from discouraging the practice, they love scalpers and give them preferential treatment, supersellers. They get discounts, skip phone queues, and get a higher price for tickets than honest customers with a ticket to sell. If an event is coming up soon, the seller can meet you at the venue to pass the ticket over. What this means is if you show up and the seller isn't there for whatever reason, illness, decided to use the ticket themselves, just can't be arsed, etc., you have paid and have no proof they did not meet you. Bye-bye money. So if you buy a ticket from Viagogo, I would honestly say you have a 40 to 45% chance of getting it. In the interests of full disclosure, I was working with them a few years ago for about 10 months. I haven't kept up with them or their practices. The above circumstances were true for me, others' experiences may vary. A few people are understandably panicking, so I'll say if you have already bought tickets with them, you may well get them, just don't write the whole thing off. You'll just get a refund for the ticket and have no event to go to, and if you go to the event and the tickets don't work, you'll get a refund for them anyway. Just make plans for if the tickets fall through, especially if you're in a strange place. Story 5. Cleaning up animals after an oil spill is a feel-good propaganda to make the public think they are helping. 90% of those animals will be dead within a few days or weeks. They've ingested enough of the oil that they are moving corpses. They, and you and Mr. Nice Person with a bottle of Dawn dish soap, just don't get it yet. Real oil spill work is done by trained professional crews, not volunteers. If you ever tried to help, you were given busy work to keep you out of the way. Story 6. We didn't meet the contractual obligations to entirely destroy the laptops Google sent to us for decommissioning. We shredded the hard disk drives and sold the laptops for a profit. Couldn't do shit about the servers though, Google branding all over them. Story 7. I used to work for a large smartphone company. During development, we used to go through phases: engineering verification testing stage, design verification test, production verification test, and finally mass production. Each stage was meant to have checkpoints in order to ensure that the final product was built with good quality and that any known bugs would be able to be ironed out before the product launch. Any bug that was not resolved would potentially have the ability to delay the launch, except that there is a thing called waivers. So the person in charge could request that certain bugs be granted a waiver, delaying the fix of the problem to a later date. No big deal, every project has a few minor bugs, right? So for each stage, there would be hundreds of waivers. Some would be minor, to be fair, but sometimes they were definitely not minor. I will never ever buy an electronic device in the first 3 months of mass production. Wait for the second wave of production and the quality of the product increases tenfold. Story 8. KFC has teenage kids cooking with industrial pressure cookers that could blow their heads through the exhaust canopy if they fucked up. I literally have seen cooks bread their own hands up in flour and dunk them in 175 degrees Celsius oil as a lark. I've seen kids use boiling hot urn water to clean the caked on flour and oil off their work boots, and that water ran into their boots, giving them serious burns. I've seen kids pick up huge pots of boiling oil and tip them to refill a cooker as a shortcut to the slow melt method. The minimum age at the time was 14 and 9 months, though they'd hire them at 14 flat with parents' permission, and you could be a supervisor at around 17 or 18. Stuff may have changed in the last 10 years since, I don't know. Watching teenagers with that type of equipment was nerve-wracking. Not saying teenagers are stupid, just the ones I had to work with. Edit. For some of the more common responses, a lark means for fun, a term we use in Australia, which answers another common question. Also, they would bread their hands over and over again until quite thick and then dip them in boiling oil. And just like food, the meat of their hand wouldn't cook straight away, but it was a game of chicken to see who would leave their hand in there the longest. Story 9. Worked for a private school. Grades were definitely bought. We were discouraged to give anything lower than a B. Had one principal that told the teacher to take the final for a student that went on summer vacation early. She called it a shadow final and said nonchalantly that it was no big deal, just answer how you think the student would answer. The school is expensive and these kids go on to fancy colleges because of these grades. Story 10. Work in retail jewelry in Australia. This would apply pretty much everywhere. Most all items for sale, the exception would be promotional pieces or special collections, has a quote-unquote minimum and a maximum price. Don't take for face value that the price is what you have to pay. Ask straight up, what is the minimum on this item? Say it like you know what you're talking about. Sometimes the minimum price can be hundreds lower than the displayed price. Michael Hill Jewelers will clean all jewelry for free. Story 11. Try to avoid going to dental chains, Aspen Dental, etc. They push you to get procedures done you don't need, and your appointment times are usually as fast as the doctor can find the first thing that's wrong. Doctors are overworked, and this increases the chance they'll mess up. If you can't pay, they'll help you finance, but you'll get hit with a 20% interest rate when you miss your first payment. They also overwork and underpay staff, which leads to disgruntled staff who just don't care. And like all public service positions, there's no backbone against shitty patients. You have to bend over backward and kiss their ass. The only way it works, and it does, is when you have a caring, skilled staff across the board. This rarely happens due to high overturns. I had to get out when the new doctor at our office pulled too many teeth in a procedure and had to give a patient a full denture instead of a partial one. He blamed the assistant and she was fired. The lab was overwhelmed with extra work from his mistakes. I didn't feel the doctor cared about anything but money, and I couldn't morally do it. I couldn't say he was a good doctor when deep down I knew it was a lie. Reasons I hate commercialized medicine. Story 12. Walmart would make us work past our shift and then force us to clock in late the next night to avoid overtime. The managers got so paranoid about overtime that they started accusing us of going over 40. I was docked 4 hours when I had no overtime and had to use my PTO, paid time off, to get back to 40. On my state, this was in 2012 and I live in Oklahoma. The labor board is a f***ing joke and they keep you from going over your hours. That happened at 2 stores I worked at. Both stores also did shady shit like having maintenance work, both cleaning and stocking. I had to stock the first half of the night and clean 5 bathrooms the last half and had to get them all cleaned before 7. I will never work for Walmart again and I warn my friends not to work for them. Story 13. Apple. All techs and quote-unquote genius employees are fully aware of widespread issues well before they are officially released to the public. They are never discussed at the morning staff meetings with management present, but are always a source of discussion in the 3 o'clock to 3:30 tech staff meeting. For example, it got to a point where I would replace an iPhone 6 Plus for the display issue and sometimes had to replace the replacement 2 to 3 times while the customer was waiting. It was embarrassing and frustrating that the official release from the company was that the issue was caused by customer misuse. We all knew the truth, and the techs with any sort of conscience would bend over backward to do what we could to right the wrongs. That is one of the several manufacturing issues masked as user error or misuse that we tried to work around. I just wanted to state that Apple was an incredible company to work for and treated its employees like gold. I have nothing bad to say in terms of the company on an employer-employee basis. Story 14. Okay, I used to work for a major card service company, and before the law changed, if you bought a gift card to, say, a Red Lobster and didn't use it for, like, say, a year, it was a distinct possibility that the entire value of that card would be gone due to monthly service charges. So, picture me, the guy trying to explain to the other guy how his $50 gift card was worth nothing, and you can imagine how that goes. Weirdly enough, I ended up loving that job the most due to the other types of accounts I used to handle. That was one of the worst parts of my job, honestly. Story 15. I worked for a cold storage company that held products for good humor, and the inside of the freezer was minus 20 degrees. One day, a friend of mine caught some boxes on the racking, causing popsicles to go everywhere. When he stepped off his lift to look up into the racking to evaluate the situation, he stepped on a popsicle, causing his feet to fly up in the air and busted his head on the ground. He lasted a few days in ICU and eventually passed. Instead of this being a freak accident and giving us time to deal with it, we were all brought into the freezer to look at the frozen puddle of blood to show us what could happen if we aren't careful. Story 16. I don't know the legality of this, but it always seemed weird. But we would get bags of another company's product, animal premix, and manually transfer that product into a bag of our own. We would give these products lots of codes of our own and sell them to customers. Story 17. The Canadian Tire in Port Coquitlam, Canada, blocks their emergency exits with metal bars to prevent theft and, consequently, prevents a quick exit in case the overly stuffed and flammables-filled building catches fire. Someone uses this knowledge to make some money. I'll take 5%. I haven't worked there since October or November of 2015 and haven't even lived in British Columbia in over a year. The blocked emergency exits were located on the other side of the employees-only doors at the back of the store. Story 18. AT&T does have secret phone plans. Depending on how long a customer you have been and how much you bid, always threaten to quit your service. They can hook you up. You have to go to an AT&T store, not an authorized dealer. An authorized dealer can't do shit. They just sell the phones and plans and can't really do much else. Also, check to see if you can get a company discount. More than likely, if your company is decent size, they have a discount. Overall, AT&T will rip you off. They are betting you don't check all the charges on your bill and will try and slip some bullshit in there. It's not the store that sold you your plan's fault. It's 100% AT&T corporate. I sold them for a while and just go get straight talk from Walmart. It's cheaper, and if you don't have the money, it's no big deal, unlike AT&T, which will fee you out of the app. Also, the I got a free phone is bullshit, or I have an upgrade, you are paying in full price. It's just broken down into monthly payments. You might have walked out of the store paying nothing, but you will be paying full price for that phone. The upgrade is a trick to get you another $500 to $1,000 in debt with the company so you can remain a customer until that amount is paid off, because you can't close your account until that phone is fully paid for. Story 19. Panera. Bread comes in as dough in bread pans the night before. Bakers come in the morning and put it in the oven. Everything was pre-made but assembled in a store like the paninis. Leftover bread and bakery products were free for closing employees to take home. I ate more bagels than I care to admit, being a starving college student and all. Story 20. Regal Cinemas movie theaters have something called a per cap. Per caps are calculated by dividing the attendance by how many concession sales there are. For example, a low per cap is anything under $3, but a higher one is over $4. If there is a 15-cent variance from one day to the next, you had to fill out a report stating why. You couldn't state things like the obvious. For example, if I manage a theater in Minneapolis and per cap sucked this past Sunday because everyone was at the Super Bowl, I could not use sports as an excuse even though it was so obvious. Instead, I'd have to say something like large groups in attendance who didn't purchase concessions. I'll also shatter another myth that nobody cares if you sneak in drinks or bootleg candy in. Just make sure you throw it away after the show so as to make cleaning the auditorium easier. It is marginally true that the theater makes the most money from the concession stand, as we only profit about 15 cents from a movie ticket, and the rest goes to Hollywood. However, in the summer, running all that air conditioner, neon, ice machines, etc., it wasn't uncommon for the electric bill to hit $30,000 or so. Plus, rent to the mall was another $60,000 a month, so, I've got a lot more if anyone else cares. Story 21. If you send your wife to pick up a load of lumber and she sits in the truck while the guy loads it, they will offload whatever knotted and warped piece of boards they can get away with. Every pile is topped with a handful of fucked up boards that have been transferred from one pile to the next every time a new unit comes in. Knotted like Swiss cheese, sometimes twisted like 90 degrees or warped so badly it won't even stack with other boards. They just lay in wait for that unaccompanied sucker who doesn't inspect the bullshit you give them. Story 22. If you ever hear Code Brown over the walkie-talkies at Target, it means they found some shit on some of the clothes and soft lines. Most of the time, it was people coming in and trying on clothes while not wearing any underwear. Yeah, it sounds disgusting, and that's because it was. A few times, someone would just dump in the changing room, but most of the time, it's because after they tried on the clothes and decided they don't want them, they would give them back to the employee at the counter to put back, and that's where the doo-doo was found. Story 23. UPS doesn't really look for missing packages, so I'll elaborate a bit. UPS does look for missing packages. They even have a special department just for that reason alone. I used to work in this department, so I know how it's being processed. If the items are missing in transit, also known as no delivery scans, they conduct the searches if they're notified of the items being missed by the sender. In that case, they will check the overgoods. Now, items in the overgoods are sorted by their types and tagged accordingly. So if you're missing something easily identifiable, like, say, an accordion, most likely it will turn up. However, if you're missing some documents or something obscure like, say, some kind of metal parts or similar, you're There are thousands of similar items and nobody is going to check them all. It's just not worth the hassle. Following me so far? So, if they do have a delivery scan, things are different. If there's a signature on the system, they will check it if that signature is similar to the signatures of the previous deliveries. If they are similar, and they don't have to match, it's considered to be delivered correctly, and you can't dispute that. If you do, you can kindly go cry a river. If the package was left at the location, and it usually is unless the sender of the goods prohibits that by the contractual agreement, it's considered to be delivered correctly and UPS isn't liable. Nobody will ever look for such packages. If you have no proof of the package is actually collected, like no scans or copy of the waybill, nobody will bother checking. So, all in all, yes, they do look, but unless you're complaining and irritating the living shit out of everyone, nobody will do much. Technically, each and every package can be found, but it's just not worth the hassle. Story 24. Worked for a certain defense contractor that made some pretty well-known products. We also did a lot of repairs. The company pushed us to fudge our employee satisfaction survey, so the score was very high. That piece of expensive tech was probably assembled by some kid with a high school degree, maximum. When a part doesn't conform to certain standards or tolerances set by engineers, we push the engineers to open up the tolerances a bit until we can comply, which happens a lot more than you'd think. NCMRs, non-conforming material requests, 4 miles. Pretty sure that the company is struggling financially because it wouldn't get with the times on certain manufacturing technology. We had a few violations of ITAR, International Traffic and Arms Regulation requirements while I was employed there. Tours of certain areas were given to people who had no business being allowed in the building, let alone that certain area. All brought on by gross negligence. Pretty sure a few people were foreign intelligence too. Money mattered more than quality. I've worked with some of this equipment, and I personally know that when certain things failed, people have died. I've seen the direct effects of this happening firsthand. It was disgusting seeing how the equipment I relied on at times to keep my ass safe was pushed through at times due to deadlines and financial requirements.
Hiring managers of Reddit. What's your favorite "they were perfect until we Googled them" story? Story 1. I was interviewing a chef for my business. The interview went great, and he had an excellent resume. Worked at some top restaurants in the world, 3 Michelin star type places. Even did a short cooking test with some spare ribs, and they were incredible. There was some stiff competition though, so eventually we decided to look at everyone's Facebook profiles. One of his old profile pics was him at a Mardi Gras parade dressed as Pikachu, with a big dildo strapped on. He got the job. I mean, as far as chefs go, that'd be pretty much what you'd hope for. Story 2. Oh, I've got a good one. We hired a new entry-level graphic designer. Let's call him Will. He had talent and a decent portfolio, but there were some strange things right from the beginning. For example, he would always come in wearing expensive suits, despite our being a jeans and t-shirt office, and his having a very low-paid position. We didn't care much about that. No clue how he affords the wardrobe, and that's none of our business. He's a designer, and I guess he likes to look nice. The weirdest thing is that he adamantly refused to accept direct deposit for his paycheck. He wanted a physical check every other week. Strange, but okay. So one evening, we're all working really late on a project together. We got some bottles of wine around, some pizzas, etc. It's miserably long hours, but we're a good team and having a good time. All of a sudden, Will looks up from his computer and freaking runs as fast as he can out the door. Not a word to any of us. He just dashes out. We all look at each other, trying to call him, with no answer. We finish up the project and go home, still wondering what happened. The next day, Will doesn't come to work. He doesn't come in the next day either. We tried calling his emergency contact, but didn't get any response either. So we Google him and see the FBI press release. Turns out he was arrested about 500 miles from our office a few hours after I ran out. I guess he got the tip that the FBI was onto him and decided to make a run for it. Turns out he'd been defrauding payroll companies for years, to the tune of about $1 million. That's why he didn't want direct deposit for his paycheck. What we didn't know was that we processed our physical checks through the same payroll company as our direct deposit, and they reported his new address to the FBI. Story 3. Had a guy apply for an entry-level post with us recently. His CV was okay, so we offered him an interview. Social media seemed okay too. He never turned up for the interview. A couple of weeks later, there's a story about him in the local paper. Turned out he was living at the local boarding house and was found in the kitchen one morning, totally wasted, wearing nothing but a pair of socks. When a couple of women who also lived there tried to escort him back to his room, he got violent and assaulted them. Given the dates stated in the paper, he didn't turn up because he'd been in jail at the time of the interview. His resume has now been added to the "Do Not Touch with a 10-foot barge pole" section in our filing cabinet. Story 4. Not the hiring manager, but I was the intern responsible for checking references and running backgrounds at our company. And this was in my first week when I was just learning how to go about things. This guy did great in the interview, so I got the go-ahead to run a background check and call his references. Something popped up in the background, so I had to call the police station to figure out how to get a copy of the police report, since whatever happened had just happened. I talked to someone on the phone and gave them his name and who I was and what I was calling for. After doing so, whoever I was talking to didn't know how to go about obtaining the information on her end. She put me on a brief hold, then took a callback number and promised to call me back with some info. Well, it's a good thing neither of us knew what to do because I received a call from the police department less than an hour later. An officer told me, "I'm really not supposed to be doing this, but I just wanted to let you know that the interview guy had been arrested for carjacking a woman, and that woman works at your company." He saw the company name and the guy's name and warned us. I'm so grateful too. If you hired him, they could have carpooled. Story 5. I was a restaurant manager and the owner hired this guy as a chef without doing basic research, which he did a few times. Anyway, the guy said he won several awards and worked with celebrities. The guy was a total to everyone on staff. I decided to Google him. The first hit is a mugshot from a drug arrest. Then more articles, one where he lied about getting a James Beard Award from a previous restaurant he worked at. A comment about him owing $25,000 or something to his former boss. The only positive restaurant review he had was from 1990. I came in after the weekend to show my boss this stuff when I learned he was fired the night before for exposing himself to one of the waitresses. Story 6. I was hiring for our late night shifts ending at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., and she was willing to work anything and looking for about 25 hours per week. This was absolutely what the company was looking for. She had mentioned that she was grieving her little boy who passed 2 weeks ago and needed something to occupy her time. She finished her 1 day of computer training and stopped showing up. Later in the week, she sent me an email stating that she wasn't ready to come back to work like she'd thought, which was understandable. My assistant manager and I decided to look her up only to find that she had multiple GoFundMe pages set up for a sob story with different amounts of time that the supposed child had been dead for. Her Facebook was full of selfies and party photos. She ended up asking for the job back a few months later, and we shot her down pretty quickly. Story 7. A really nice, clean-cut young man from a nearby college applies in my shop. Sweet, friendly, outgoing, and smart, he was perfect, until we Googled him. He had a last name that was the same as the girl I had gone to school with. So I Googled his name and found his Facebook and discovered that he was actually her little brother. I immediately called my friend, his sister, and said, "Hey, your brother just applied in my shop. I'm gonna hire him." She said, "Sweet, free ice cream." So he was perfect until I Googled him. And then he was even better. He worked for me for 2 years and was an absolute delight. Story 8. We had a near miss, one senior hire. We were talking about him and how something seemed a little off when we Googled him. It was like he didn't exist at all, and the odd super positive tidbit of information that was always a bit too much of a stretch to be completely believable. I mean, 1 or 2 people saying you're the best thing on earth is one thing, but this was like all you got were these sporadic and hyper-manic observations. One of the junior members of the team pipes up at this point. She's overheard what we're talking about. Turns out she's worked the last 2 places he's worked, and he's like a locust. He's extremely good at his job, but an absolute nightmare in all other ways. Sexual harassment, bullying, turning up wasted. He's a real niche skill set. There are always more roles than people to fill, so he hops along, bullies everyone out of their role in his team, and brings in his entourage to the point where almost anyone normal rage quits because the atmosphere is so toxic. Then when HR tries to step in, he hits them with a constructive dismissal case and drags lawyers in so there's no paper trail. She said he'd done it at her last job and the one before. It's one of those things that once you know, you start to notice stuff. So at events, when somebody mentioned this guy's name, half the table would just give each other a look and the others would have no idea. It's not quite an open secret, but it's definitely on the grapevine anecdotally if not formally. Glad we dodged that bullet. Please tell me that junior member got a little something for saving your ass. Story 9. Somewhat the reverse. I was sharked out by a guy who was running his own startup and looking for talent in my specific field. I liked the look of his company, his business model seemed viable, his salary was competitive, and he offered equity. I was bored with my current position, so it was tempting. Out of curiosity, I Googled him, and the email he contacted me through, his name was really common, thinking maybe he'd used it to register anywhere else. His startup had no Glassdoor profile. I found a bunch of posts by him on a South African forum that was really racist against black people. He used the N-word at least once and was really aggressive. I declined the offer and I linked to him what I found that sealed my decision. He responded back saying he wished I'd reconsider and that those comments were for somebody else. He used his LinkedIn profile photo as his avatar. He registered on the site with the email he contacted me with. That's how I found him. I thought that was clear, but I suppose not. Always look up your potential employers, kids. Story 10. Had a guy come in to apply for a dump truck job. Seemed okay, very well spoken, and clean cut. Not the type you usually see applying for a job driving a dump truck. He told me he had a PhD in psychology and had his own driving while intoxicated counseling business, but his wife divorced him and he lost everything. So I Googled him. He wasn't lying, but the story goes much deeper. Turns out his wife was cheating on him, and when he found out where the boyfriend lived, he snorted almost enough coke to give himself a heart attack and went to his wife's house where his wife's car was parked. He shot 30 rounds from an AR-15 into the house and the car with them inside the house. Somehow he got off with only 6 months in jail and probation. Obviously, you can't trust someone with a horrible aim to dump stuff in the right spot. Story 11. I used to manage a group home for developmentally disabled adults. I was in charge of hiring the staff that we needed to make the house run properly. I saw a name come across my desk that I had to interview and I instantly looked them up. Turns out this was a girl that had an obsessive crush on me from years ago, and on her social media she still did. I was in a panic because she was basically stalking everything I did, and I really couldn't back out because it was 5 minutes before the interview. She came in and it was so weird. She acted normal. We interviewed in a professional manner for about 15 minutes, showed her around, and I thought, wow, maybe she's done some maturing and I just let it go. Then we got back to my office. It started a sentence like, well, insert name here, it's been a pleasure having you here. And oh, no, we're not done yet. You think you can ignore everything like you don't know what's going on? I know where you work now. I know where you live, and I'm going to keep calling. There was more she was saying along the lines of me telling her to kindly leave. But a phone call to the police, as well as a restraining order, kept her away from my work and my life. Story 12. We were narrowing the group down to 2 to 3 candidates. We then Google, Facebook, LinkedIn them, and get to one that was in the top 2. Their FB was completely open to the public to view everything. Lots of racist, sexist comments, risque photos of them with some slight nudity. Was too bad. Their resume was quite good, just not something we would consider appropriate. And this is why I tell you soon-to-be college graduates to lock down that profile. You make your public profile a nice and professional photo of you, including your basic bio information and a few posts that are wholesome. The rest is locked to only friends. Story 13. Little different, but a story that always entertained me. I worked for a staffing agency. The guy is hired and comes in for a background and drug screen. He has lots of priors, but he was working in a kitchen, so we got the okay to continue the process. It wasn't until after the drug screen that he got a little nervous. I told him that we're going to do a drug screen now, and he asked me to put it off until Monday. Typically, we'd have to do it that day so they could start work, but this was like 4:45 on a Friday, and we wanted to go home, so we said yes. Monday rolls around, and he shows up. He takes the test and it comes up positive for weed, cocaine, and some other stuff. We told him that we test multiple things and that cocaine also showed up. We asked him if that was a surprise. He told us, I dabble in cocaine, but I thought this was a test for weed. We politely said that we couldn't hire him. There are so many weird stories from working at a staffing agency. Story 14. Years ago at my previous company, a few coworkers met a young man interested in a software development position with us at a local trade conference and invited him to come interview with us later that afternoon. Said fellow eagerly provided the link to his blog. The top post was about being recently released on probation after a stint for illicit sales, and how his upstream supplier was kind enough to front him some startup capital and some new inventory to resume his little side gig, and his previous stash was allegedly confiscated during a previous visit by law enforcement. Coworkers and I decided to read a few more posts just to make sure we didn't confuse him for the wrong guy and inadvertently got him the wrong link. Sure enough, a few photos and some older posts confirmed it was the same guy. We managed to get a little additional work done in the rest of the afternoon between speculation as to when his apparent commitment to full public disclosure would land himself back in the clink and whether we ought to even mention having checked out his blog. We all had to try very hard to keep a straight face when he did come in for his interview. He actually was reasonably knowledgeable when it came to the job, and somehow we managed to completely avoid the question of his side gig in recreational pharmaceutical sales. We gave him an A+ for honesty and an F for good sense. He was not extended an offer of employment. Story 15. Where I work, they hired a guy who was great at the job and a nice, quiet employee. His background check took forever to clear for some reason, but it ultimately came back clean. Eventually, he said he needed to take a day off for court, but he just never came back after that day. Upon looking into it, he had been found guilty of sexual misconduct with a minor, 2 counts. That must have been why it took so long to come back. They were unsure if it should be reported since it was pending. Big sigh. Story 16. This happened earlier this week. Near perfect resume. Guy has quite relevant experience up until about 4 years ago and has been trying to get his own startup off the ground since then. It's not working out. No big deal, most don't. So he's looking for another job. Of course, I go and Google his startup. It's complete and utter crap. He's been trying to get people to invest in the equivalent of a perpetual motion machine. Not that, but a similarly fanciful concept of another type. No wonder he couldn't get any investment or traction of any other type. So yeah. Hard pass. Story 17. Pre-Google era, but I think it fits the question. Family owned a trucking company. Literally everyone in my immediate family has or had a commercial driver's license. Mom's turn to take a newbie for the road test pre-hire. During the road test, they were involved in an accident. They were hit while stopped. The company was based out of Indiana. The accident happened in Illinois. Newbie gets arrested on the spot. Come to find out he has warrants that hadn't been out long enough for the background check service we used to get them yet. One of the warrants, stalking a female dispatcher from the previous trucking company he worked for. Story 18. I was interviewing a much older guy for a similar position to mine. Everything seemed okay, and he was our best candidate. Before moving forward, I did a quick Google search only to find that he was fired from a previous job because of stealing $5,000 worth of computer equipment. My director hired him anyway. Well, he's already got the equipment he needs, we should be fine, they said. Story 19. Our organization was secular, though it had been originally founded by a Catholic bishop, and the organization's purpose was to resettle refugees coming into the U.S. for the first time. If you've done anything related to refugee resettlement, you'd know that 1. Many if not most of refugees coming to the U.S. are fleeing religious persecution of some variety, and 2. The USCCB, or United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, is one of the largest players in the entire process, bringing over about 30% of total refugees that come to the U.S. Also, it should be noted that our staff was extremely multi-ethnic and diverse, with many of the staff being former refugees themselves. Had a candidate and she seemed fine. Googled her. Holy intolerance Batman. Found a whole blog she wrote about atheism. Okay, that's not a problem, but it was violent atheism. Things like how people who were caught in religious conflicts deserve to die for worshiping any sort of god, that they got what was coming to them. Now she can't stand to be around people who worship any sort of god. Basically, her entire online presence was, if you believe in a deity, you are awful and deserve to die in a fire. She also didn't seem to be a big fan of non-white people either. Hard pass on that one. Story 20. Alright, I apologize in advance, but this needs some setup. I worked for a service company. Do you know how places will outsource things like food service to Sodexo? Just hand off the entire department? That was how our company operated, except we specialized in maintenance, housekeeping, and laundry. I worked in the healthcare section of this place. I was assigned to a large nursing home and basically given charge of the whole department. I was a department head and sat at the big table with the director of social work. The only difference was that they were employed by the facility and I was getting paid by a third-party company. This is important because, to all outsiders, I worked for this nursing home and so did my entire staff. We were constantly hiring housekeepers. It was a terrible job and the pay was horrific. You could make more money as a cashier at a convenience store without ever having to haul around giant tractor-sized garbage bags full of poopy adult diapers. So we always had jobs posted, and I always kept a stash of applications at the ready. One day I get a call from the front desk saying someone wants to happily apply. I'm busy. Fill out the app and leave it. Nope, she's insistent that she needs to see me. This is a big red flag given the terrible nature of this work. If you're that desperate for a job that is this terrible, then there is usually a frightening reason. But I meet her anyway. She's nice, but seems a bit off. Her work history is solid. She seems motivated, but there's just something striking me odd about this woman. She's early 60s. After she leaves, I immediately call my counterpart at the last place she worked. What she didn't know was that we both worked for the same company. That if she came to work for me, she'd be working back at the same company she just left. She likewise didn't know that we had the contractor for all but 2 nursing homes in that 50-mile radius, and we were in close touch. As soon as I mention the name, the other manager just yells, "Nope!" into the phone. She had been a certified nursing assistant, or CNA, but she was fired by that facility. She was brought back in as a housekeeper because we had 2 different HR systems and she slipped through by switching shifts. She had been fired as a CNA for trading hand jobs for drugs. She'd tug off an elderly resident in exchange for their pills, basically. As soon as the other guy found out, he fired her, but not before complaints hit his desk that the new housekeeper was up to her old shenanigans. Come to find out that her long career was actually far worse than it looked on paper. She was a licensed practical nurse for years, but lost her license and job for stealing drugs. She became a CNA because, at the time in my state, CNAs were certified not by the state, but by private facilities. You got to call yourself a CNA if an RN worked through the 15-hour state-mandated training with you, but you just had no proof of completion for the course as evidence of this. You didn't actually get licensed by the state, which is no longer the case. So basically, she would just change her job title. Jobs where she was a nurse on a resume became jobs where she was a CNA. Then after the shoe dropped, she just went back and said she'd been a housekeeper the whole time. She resurfaced some years later doing private duty personal care. Story 21. I hired a girl and she interviewed well. The first day she threw up some red flags, but I figured I was misjudging or misinterpreting. People start missing money, and one of my belongings disappears, which had never happened prior to her hiring. She was insulting everyone and making customers uncomfortable, and I wanted her gone less than 4 weeks from her start date, but didn't want to pay unemployment. Do a search, arrest records in multiple states involving domestic violence and theft. She ended up saying she could just rape one of my barely legal employees, so I fired her for sexual harassment. Lesson learned. Check everyone out no matter how well they interview. Story 22. I share my dad's name, so when you Google my name, you pull up his exploits. Stuff like being arrested for having 7 semi-trucks worth of weed in his driveway. Thanks, Dad.
What's the most cringeworthy thing you've seen someone put on their CV, cover letter, or application form? The job was for a programming position. The cover letter was almost a whole solid page of text describing the person's ongoing fight against aliens, demons, and some group of humans that were trying to gain control of the world. It was obvious that English was not their first language, and I couldn't figure out if the name meant that they were male or female. But it was the first cover letter I read from start to finish, paying attention to every detail. They listed acts that they had done to prevent the world takeover and how the skills they had learned doing that would make them useful in the position. How they were forming an alliance with others, angels were listed, in the battle and were great at working with others and getting people motivated to work towards a goal. The fact that they had been fighting this battle for almost a decade and had never given up no matter what setbacks had happened and how that proved they would be hardworking and can deal with anything that would come up. In the end, they asked for the job because they needed additional allies and resources that only the job could provide. If they had any programming experience, training, or skill, it was never mentioned on the resume. Really, other than being completely and insanely crazy and off topic, the resume did a good job of covering the bases of what a cover letter should do. It explained what they needed, what they could provide, and gave all the examples to back it all up. I have no idea if it was a joke, the ramblings of someone that was having a mental breakdown, or what. I suppose the other option was my recruitment letter to a secret organization. I wanted to bring the person in for an interview just to see what would happen, but it was voted down by the rest of the company who were concerned about security after reading the resume. Okay, so this one's a joke. Definitely a joke, right? Also, one wonders, what job was this exactly that they were applying to? One where only this job, could provide the right allies and resources? And would you have asked them over for an interview? I would have, just for kicks and to scratch that itch of curiosity. And come on, when's the last time you spoke with someone who could have saved the world? Story 2. I used to teach high school in the States. My seniors had to create a resume for a different class. They came to me to proofread it since I was the English teacher. Some of the jobs they wanted were scientist, lawyer, computer technician, model, vet. Nothing out of the ordinary for, 17-year-olds, most of whom had no idea what they wanted to be or do. Most of them didn't even care about the assignment to begin with. However, the credentials they had for these jobs, they were fantastic. Likes roller coasters and theme parks, able to rap, currently raising a child, quit smoking, completed court-ordered community service, 100% GPA at high school, been to court, burritos. That's right, one student just wrote under their interests, burritos. It was hard for me to correct that because I too am interested in burritos and tacos and anything else Mexican food. However, if you're going to be a surgeon, you may want to play up other aspects of your life. One student, hoping to be a lawyer, asked me what his chances were. I told him that with his current and apparently growing familiarity with the legal system, he should be a shoo-in after he's off probation. Story 3. I got 2. The first was a guy who stopped in to drop off a resume at a bike shop I worked at. His professional reference was a person who I knew personally. Said reference was a dysfunctional alcoholic who had, among many, many other missteps, blew off a court date where he was supposed to testify for a personal friend of mine's defense because he was drunk. And this was the guy who the applicant wanted to vouch for him. The second was the following cover letter, which I have saved for the lulz and will leave here without further comment except to say it's even better if you read it aloud with attention to punctuation. My story isn't for the faint of heart. Almost 1 year ago, I was riding along at night. At this time, I was very angry and upset about more than one thing that was going on within my life. Letting it out by riding and crying, I felt like bike riding always made me feel better. As I was screaming and crying at the sky, asking why I was alive and how I can't take my life anymore. At this time, I was so confused and lost within my life that I just didn't know what to do. As my emotions explode from within me, I'm riding about 31 miles per hour, crying in emotional pain, letting everything out. As I'm heading home, I take a corner too fast. Next thing I know, I slide 5 feet across the road. The first thing that hit me was the pain. It was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. Screaming in pain, I got up and nobody was around to help me and I had no cell phone. My house was about 3 miles away, so I jumped back on my bike and said to myself, I have to get home, I have to get home. Motivated myself just a little so I can make it past the pain. Got my sister to take me to the hospital. When I got there, they told me I fractured my whole right side. I love bike riding and fixing bikes and everything about them. Thanks for reading. You can reach me at phone number. I also attached my resume. Story 4. I have a few. First, giant word art reading cover letter, followed by a huge centered picture of themselves. It was poorer than a grade 3 biography. Second, as a favor for a cute barmaid, I delivered her resume to the quote-unquote right people in my company. One of the bullet points under her experience section was that she had worked on a group paper in college with both a table of contents and an index. Third, my friend had single and in good health when applying for engineering industrial placements. Fourth, I reviewed a resume last year that used the Star Trek title font. If that wasn't bad enough, he used 24-point font. There was also one where a guy listed as a strength, quote, I'm excellent at debating various issues as evidenced by the fact that I constantly win arguments with my girlfriend. Fifth, I've had a guy attach a 2-page list of everything he had accomplished since the first grade. Examples include, but are not limited to, 2nd place in 4th grade spelling bee, 3rd place in 5th grade mathathon, and honorable mention in 8th grade charity drive. 6, I've had one come to me. Under strengths, she mentioned God-fearing, and under technical skill, Windows. 7th, household chores like cleaning my room, they said. This was for a position I had advertised with a mandatory 5+ years of paint and drywall experience. 8th, we had a guy write that he was voted, quote, campus cutie by the girls at his university and attached a link. And finally, 9th, I had a guy tell me someone sent a 19-page resume to a company. Their filter automatically rejected him, and he still doesn't know why. Okay, so the first one and the last one do have one thing in common. They really had nothing substantial to say about themselves, because if you've got to fill up all that negative space with fluff, you really don't have much in the first place anyway, right? Story 5. I've always wanted to share the insanity of this cover letter I received about a year ago. My name is Redacted. I am a junior/intermediate graphic designer looking for work and saw your company through a few website browsing. It's a tough market out there for the new designers of the world, but I never give up, and with that being said, I am currently working as a graphic designer. Out of the hundreds of applicants, I was chosen for this job. As you might know, Redacted is known for the lowest employment rate in all of Redacted, and I was chosen for this position from all these candidates. Sometimes that blows my mind to think about. Because I love design and I love to learn and grow every day is an adventure for me. I'm always on the lookout for the next thing out there. I have the best attitude towards improving my work and making things come to life. I cannot help but feel excited when something has come to life from a little sketch or a noodle doodle. Attaches my resume for your records if ever you are looking for a dynamic, energetic designer. You never know what might come from stepping out of the box and showing your hunger to learn and grow to the companies of your dreams. So here's a little story about me so you can get to know who I am. I am 25 years old. I have a cat named Barker. He loves to break and smash my dishes when he has the chance. I have red fuzzy hair. I play guitar and sing when no one is looking. I love my boots and will wear them with any dress I have. I do not have a favorite color. They are all wonderful in their own way. Design is my world. I always think of new creative things. For example, ever shred your lettuce? And picture a lettuce man shredding on guitar. I have the giggles that follow these thoughts. My greatest adventure was skydiving last year. Was the most exciting moment in a gal's life. I'd rather spend hours at Chapters looking at the kids' sections of books than shop for earrings. I spend my money on design books for my e-reader and Android phone. I love old pubs with folk music and dancing. I'm the girl excited for life, and every day is a new adventure. I try to implement these things into my designs every day. My design professor said to me once, "You will never get that dream job unless you go out there to find that company you want to work for and go after it. It never hurts to try." And that is what my mission is to do. I will chase after my dream, a dream to be a designer of great, a designer meant for the books. Thank you for taking the time to read this email, and I leave you with my last words. Have a fantastic afternoon. Story 6. I was a supervisor for a contractor that did door-to-door cable sales. We had plenty who would scrub the resumes, and then a small group of us would interview pretty much everyone who could string a sentence together. We'd generally look over the resume and cover letter for about a minute before the person came in. I had to interview a girl who, I swear to you, had a picture of herself, very large black girl, on her cover letter, and under skills listed bad B. The email contained the N word, something like a big beautiful N91 at service. Turns out it was a real application, and my coworkers decided they had to see if she was real. So this is going to require a little more explanation though. As I said, if your resume and cover letter are typed and in English, you would likely get a preliminary interview. The manager or dirtbag in our office would divide up the resumes for the 3 or 4 of us who were qualified to conduct interviews. In the case of Big Beautiful N-word 91, the assistant manager, who I was pretty good friends with, decided to pick me to have some fun at my expense. After the first interview, if you come across as remotely intelligent with a shred of motivation, we'd set you up on a ride-along. You'd shadow one of the salespeople for an entire field day, like 11:30 to 6:30 or so. And based on your reaction to the work, hint it sucked, and what the person they shadowed had to say, we'd make our final decision. Generally, if someone seemed completely unable to walk for the 7 hours a day they needed to, we wouldn't even give them a job shadow interview. It just wasted their time and hours and often resulted in critical reviews on the job websites, which was a big no-no from management and our client. However, in the case of bad A, B, I made an exception. I had our manager schedule her for a ride-along with our assistant to get back at him. He was not thrilled, to say the least. Alright, so I don't know about you, but dang, I would not even want to risk pissing off, quote, Big Beautiful N-word 91. Enjoying the video? Since you're already halfway through, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more content that's like hella funny, like this one and a lot more coming up. Now let's get back to the stories. Story 7. I go to an art design university that requires a basic cover letter and an art design portfolio to enter. And every now and then, some kids or friends and acquaintances would get a hold of me and ask for pointers about how to get into the school and maybe critique their portfolio. There are 3 main things that I get that always make me cringe. A portfolio with a crap ton of manga and anime pieces. I mean, you could make the case that manga is illustration and sequential art, but not really. Crappy Photoshop, the really airbrushy, cheesy, tacky things, usually of a scantily clad female with penciled angel wings or fire behind her. These chicks are usually colored with Photoshop's airbrush tool slapped onto a black background, and yeah. I can't dig up anything off Google or DeviantArt as an example, but imagine a rap album with airbrush. Dafont.com. Dafont is good in small doses, and you really gotta cherry pick your typefaces, or you'll end up looking really kitschy. Helvetica is overrated and overused, but when in doubt, just always Helvetica. There's like a list of things that are considered kitschy and tacky, and more often than not, I have this holier-than-thou mentality, but it is what it is. Story 8. I was holding down a steady government job, and out of sheer boredom and a desire to level grind my public service job application skills, I had started applying for anything and everything the federal government had listed which paid more than I was currently making. After about 100 near-identical cut-and-paste applications, I was getting kinda loopy and decided I'd throw together some freaking weird variant for the next job off the list, which happened to be in the local equivalent of the IRS. So I formatted my resume as if it was a magazine article, including inline text boxes and everything. It was utterly embarrassing, so of course I sent it off and forgot about it. I got the job, a paid relocation to the national capital, and a 3-grade promotion. I'm still not quite sure what the recruiters were thinking. So either his Photoshop skills are legit impressive and persuasive, and if anything, we finally know where our taxes are going? I guess. Not so impressive, though. Story 9. Apparently at Duke University, there's a thing called tenting. 100% of my knowledge about this comes from a woman I interviewed who had it on her resume. Because student admission to basketball games is based on a line and not a ticket system, students over there have set up some elaborate systems of camping out for a long ahead of time to get in. They organize their group around classes so that the tent is always occupied by some minimum number of people. You need a certain number present to hold a tent in line, I guess. Apparently, she had been the organizer of one of the top of the line tents. She also felt it necessary to put this on her resume ahead of other important facts, like, for example, the actual job she'd had for a year since she graduated. This was an interview for an associate buyer. It was not tent related. Additionally, she answered every "tell me about a time" question with something having to do with the tent. When did you face adversity you had to overcome? Well, once we were camping out for Georgia Tech, there was an ice storm. When did you have a disagreement with someone you had to work with that you were forced to overcome? Well, Jenny had to do a sorority function and the group was split on whether to kick her out of our tent. Some days, I think she was just trolling, and if she was, that's a pretty elaborate way to go, but holy hell. Story 10. At a previous web dev job, we had an ongoing contract with the state government agency, which was trying to help people with unemployment. The basic idea of the program was that you take a series of tests evaluating your skills in a few areas, and you'd end up getting this stupid certificate declaring that you were work ready or something like that. Anyway, one of the projects we did for them was an entire job board just for people with these certificates. The project was pretty dumb from the start, but we finished it and went live. At some point while testing the site, our clients posted a test job just to see how the system worked. For reasons unbeknownst to me, they did not delete this job posting, but just noted in the comments that it wasn't a real job and shouldn't be applied for. You can probably guess about how well that worked. It got to the point where I'd search the database about once a week and keep my coworkers up to date on how many people had applied for the test job. It was in the triple digits. Reading the actual applications was kind of depressing. I wanted to laugh at these people, but it was just so damn pitiful I just ended up feeling bad. Stuff like, quote, "I am very good tester and can test anything you need tested." But the best or worst was the cover letter one woman submitted with her application. She'd clearly just grabbed a generic cover letter template from about.com or some other place, and she did not even bother editing it at all. So the thing literally read like, "Dear name of hiring manager, my name is your name, and I'm writing in regards to name of job. I have years of experience with skill applicable to job." Story 11. There are two types of people that come into a business looking for work. The first kind has at least Googled your company, knows what you do, and has a resume on hand. The second type walks in wearing jeans and a t-shirt and asks, "Are y'all hiring?" So I get this number two kind in one day and he asks for an application. We don't have any applications, but we do accept resumes. Resume? Yes. And I kid you not, this kid reaches into his back pocket, pulls out a folded piece of paper, unfolds it, and hands it to me. It's his freaking high school diploma. Another one, I was hiring an admin assistant. One lady's resume said, "I'm very skilled in handling administration in the correct manner." Her resume was 5 pages of incorrectly used words that spell check had probably selected incorrectly for her, and a few bona fide spelling errors and typos. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and not be too much of a snob, but given the amount of proofreading and editing the position was responsible for, I did not hire her. Lastly, not me, but my mom has been hiring people since 1995, and she's kept a wall of shame list for all the things she's seen. A selection of a few. Bachelorette degree in computers. Please let me know if I can omit you in any way. Excellent with the C typist, great speed with 2 P's and accuracy, 756 WPM. Married, 8 children, prefers frequent travel. It's best for employers that I not work with people. I am very detail-oriented with the E and the I switched up. Well, I can't imagine an HR staffing department to be the most fun of jobs at a company, but when those rare sparkles of humans walk in that make you both scratch your head and chuckle at the same time, I also think it'd be a good idea to have a wall of shame to, put a smile on your face once in a while on those super slow work days. Story 12. A few that I have encountered. First, on the application, quote, "Please provide at least 2 different personal references that are not your immediate family." Contact 1, Miss June Juiceberg, relationship, mother. Contact 2, Mark Markster, relationship, ma boo. Ma boo. Second, on a written application, "Why do you want to work here?" "My mom says I need a job." "Do you have your own transportation?" Different handwriting. "I will drive him." Most of the application was filled out in the mother's handwriting. She picked up and dropped off the application, and she called several times wondering why her daughter did not get an interview. Third, one resume sent to us, a music software company, had an image of a Doom character. This was about 15 years ago. Another one said they were very detail-oriented, however the word pharmaceuticals was misspelled both times it appeared, and each time it was misspelled differently. Fourth, writing their introductory paragraphs in the third person. Sally excels at Excel, and in 2023, she won an Excel competition. I've seen it a couple of times, and it's just freaking weird. Fifth, I once had to look at a resume for a kid who put down under skills, expert at not stealing, smiley face emoticon, and yes, he put the emoticon on there. I didn't hire him. 6, so many good ones. We had a guy who had the sentence, "I like helping people to help people and people too," in his cover letter. If we have to reread a sentence 10 times to convince ourselves it makes no sense, you probably aren't getting the job. 7th, this guy put backgrounds on every page. The background image he used was his face. 8th, one question on the application was, "What are your career objectives?" To which the applicant wrote, "The sky's the limit." 9th, where I work, you need to be available for weekend shifts and holidays as those are our peak times. So on the application, it asks, "Are you available to work on weekends and holidays? If not, why?" And this guy wrote, "Nah, I need my weekends to chill with the boys." And finally, 10th, my friend wrote, and I kid you not, quote, "I've been awesome since I can remember," and then proceeded to list how he was valedictorian of his high school, top of the class at law school, etc. And the crazy part, he got the job at a pretty well-respected law firm. And to this day, I am baffled.
What are subtle red flags at a job interview that say, working here would suck? When you're signing all the forms they give you and you're taking your time to read over every document so that you can fully understand what you're getting into. And people come in and start telling you that you don't need to read this and that just sign here and so on. I was working with an indie game studio. As a remodeler, texture artist, it was just for fun and making contacts. The game we were working on started picking up traction and had studios looking to pick us up. The lead in the project immediately got together with an attorney and drafted up contracts. Not a problem. I got mine, but there wasn't a rush, and since I had to do regular work for bills, I kind of ignored it for a couple days. The lead and his attorney started bombarding me with emails telling me to sign it. I replied with, "After I read it, I'll let you know." I immediately got a phone call from the attorney assuring me it was all just standard stuff, and if I wanted to secure my position in the studio, I should just sign it. Red flags everywhere. So when I had time, I read it, and I'm glad I did. It stated that anything I worked on in my personal time, which I did a lot of as an artist, was their property, and I had no rights to even show it. If I left the studio for any reason, I couldn't work in the video games industry for a minimum of 12 months. Even though I was working for free, I was not allowed to take a paid position at any other game studio while working with them. The list went on. I told them I wasn't going to sign that, and if they pressed, I was leaving. They pressed, I left. Find later that the lead started the studio, hired people, then drained the accounts, sold the hardware, locked the doors, and never returned. Story 2. I interviewed for an independent contractor position at a piece rate. It's hard to predict just how much you're going to earn on a piece rate, so to attract me, the manager showed me some pay stubs from his guys. I noticed that, number 1, he could easily cherry-pick pay stubs to show my best guys' best weeks. All that tells me is that I'm likely to make less than what he's showing me, at least on average. Number 2, the pay stubs were obviously designed to be confusing. They were a full page and absolutely covered in data. It wanted me to be impressed by a dollar amount, obviously not accounting for costs which the contractor has to carry or taxes which the contractor has to deduct and pay. But he took them away before anyone could have deciphered what the pay period, piece rate, number of jobs, or KMS was. Number 3, he showed me other people pay stubs. What the f***? Another red flag is that they were desperate to hire because they didn't have enough contractors to deliver the work contracts they'd already sold. I had 2 guys from different offices call me after I declined the position who apparently still thought I was considering it. There were other red flags. They weren't going to fit in a short comment, but I really wasn't interested. Even the gigantic, gaudy, prominently displayed trophy in the guy's office turned me off. Office fantasy football, lol. He said, "We take fantasy football seriously around here." I said, "I can see that." An independent contractor assumes all kinds of expenses and risks, especially for a job involving equipment and property. I could have lost a lot of money working for them, or compromised my ability to continue working. I did tell them they needed to double the mileage allowance and offer incentives to get started, and asked about regular employment. They offered me a job going around fixing the piece rate guy's mistakes for a salary that would have me well below the poverty line. It was a Mickey Mouse outfit. They're still hiring. If they're that desperate, then it doesn't matter how much money you could get. Story 3. Jumping on the not-so-subtle train here. About a month ago, I interviewed for a position to run the office of a lawn or landscape company in my town. When I arrived, in-person interview, I waited at the receptionist's desk. A man wheeled out of the office in his desk chair and said to the receptionist, "Got a resume or anything for this one?" Meaning me. He literally looked at my resume for the first time sitting in front of me. He then started asking questions, never introduced himself, no, "Hi, how are you? Thanks for coming in," etc. He interviewed me while I was sitting at the receptionist's desk, with the receptionist sitting there working. If she took a call, he just paused until she was through. He repeatedly referred to his landscape crew as "my Mexicans," and when I politely ended the interview, he said, "Well, if you want, you can call on Friday to ask if we want you back for a second interview." Bro, no. Story 4. I came in for a job interview at 7:30 p.m. The entire staff was still in the office. Should have known right then that 9 to 5 was not ever going to happen. One day I worked until 2:30 a.m. to finish up a big project. My boss said to me I could come in an hour later the next morning. Gee, thanks, bro. With my public transport or travel time, that gives me a solid 2 hours of sleep instead of just the one. I just wanted to say that there are really good employers out there. Do not stand by being treated so poorly because you deserve to be treated with respect. For any employers reading this, here's a few examples of how to create a loyal, healthy employee base. The current employer puts family first. If there is an emergency at home, they tell you to handle that first. For example, when I was miscarrying, they told me, "I don't want to see you in the next 2 weeks at least. Take your time and give me a call when you feel ready to come back in, okay?" 9 to 5 means 9 to 5. If you have to leave early for something or come in later because of something, they expect you to take your own responsibility. You don't even check if you actually catch up to lost time, they just expect that you do. By doing so, you create that on the rare occasion that you do have to stay late to finish something, you do that without complaining, because it only happens incidentally and not structurally. It certainly isn't expected. In fact, they ask if you really have to stay late or if you just think you have to stay late. If you both give and take, you're much more likely to give back. They frequently and genuinely ask about your well-being, and then also follow that up. If you tell them your mother is unwell, they ask about her a week later. It's not lost in the abyss that is business. No, you feel seen and heard. You look stressed. Is there anything I can do? Do you want to go over your to-do list together and prioritize what needs done first? Things like this mean the world. One time they walked in and said, "Hey, my afternoon meeting got canceled. I know you have like 15 files that need checking, and I've seen how full your calendar is. Why don't you give me 4 and I'll make sure they get sent out today, to lighten your load a little." They focus on little tokens of appreciation. A chocolate Easter bunny waiting on your desk at Easter. Last year, they hid 10 Easter eggs in every room. I found one hidden in the box of my crackers. They make sure your salary is paid before Christmas, even though you normally don't get paid before the 26th. They make sure every secretary gets flowers on Secretary Day. They bought us weird pens. Think bright neon color with dangly beads on top. Just because they thought it would brighten up our days. Like, it only costs a penny, but it makes your staff feel seen. When there's a heat wave, they treat us with popsicles. When it's holiday season, they randomly decide to close the office at noon on December 31st. If we have to earn it in the last couple of hours of this day, we're doing something wrong. So let's shut down for the day. Have a good one, guys. They do not tolerate gossip. We talk with each other, not about each other. They hire capable staff. People who are not putting in the work or effort do not last. They will ask us about people's progress, like, "What do you think about the new receptionist?" And we can answer frankly, even if our opinion is that they're not making enough progress, etc. They want to know what we think and they value our input. This creates a healthy work environment, with driven people who all have heart for the cause. Mistakes are human. We solve them together without smack talking about the person responsible. Of course, we all have our bad days, and it's okay to mope and murple here and there to your roommate, but we really try to keep that to an absolute minimum. I have a hard rule. I don't with extra hours unless I hold company stock. I don't sacrifice my own time for someone else's bottom line. But the first job sounds like a dream, though. Story 5. I had a job interview with 2 people asking questions. One of them brought questions to the wrong people. Things I found later. The person on the IT team who had been with the company longest had been there just under a year. Their turnover was higher than McDonald's, over 50% turnover annually. They had a goal to get it down to 40%. Bonuses only get paid 1 year after you've been there. For a full calendar year, that only starts counting on January 1st. If you get hired January 2nd, 2020, you wouldn't get your first bonus until 2022. There was no manager for the programmers. There was no director for the IT team. They had tracking software for every keystroke, idle time, programs you were active in. They would question idle time, which meant people on the phone with clients would be questioned often because their computers would be idle. There was a lot going wrong, but the interview slip-up wasn't enough to really give it away in time. Suffice it to say, they didn't meet their turnover reduction goal. Who has time to track keystrokes and idle time? I've heard of places doing this, and all I can think is, don't you have better things to do? Like actually work instead of micromanaging employees? Story 6. I once interviewed for a job wherein the interviewer actually directly told me that the job was extremely stressful, and they had had a slew of new hires quit within a month or two. The job was at a psychiatric hospital. I thanked her for being honest with me and said that I was not interested. As she was walking me out, she leaned in and said, "You're doing the right thing. Our last hire quit because he said he was having palpitations all the time here and was worried he would have a heart attack." About 3 years later at another company, I saw one of the women who had interviewed me. She worked in a totally different position in a totally different setting. She said that the other woman who had interviewed me, the one who gave me the warning, actually did suffer a heart attack. She survived, and she stopped working there. I was so thankful she warned me. Most interviewers wouldn't do that. Thinking more about that woman, obviously she was very stressed and she was having to cover work for that position that needed to be filled. She could have easily, and understandably, have gone into survival mode and thought, you know what, let's just hire her, meaning me, and then at least I will have some relief for a month or two until this one quits too. But she didn't do that. She thought of my welfare, a stranger, over her own interests, and clearly she was suffering. I would have relocated for that job too, about 150 miles. She was aware of that. Maybe that played into her decision to warn me, maybe not. Either way, she was an extraordinary person. She sounds like she was a considerate person, but also it can be hard to train a new person. It requires a bit of extra time in the day to teach them the ropes. You put up with it because you know it's better to take more time in the short term to teach someone correctly so that they will be up to speed quickly. Even if her schedule was difficult, it might have been easier to deal with a hard schedule than train someone new every month. I know something less difficult, helping me reach my goals. How about considering hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel? Story 7. I don't think I've necessarily had any subtle flags. I had a lot of interviews over the past year, and some made themselves really obvious as to when it would be a bad idea to take a job. They also tend to be the employers that ghost you afterwards. There were always ones that wanted interviews in person as well, despite the majority of mine being remote. Memorable ones include a 10-minute interview where the person didn't ask any questions of value, one where the employer suggested I should take my mask off, didn't have a clue what he needed for a person to fill the position, and then made sexist comments about not wanting to hire a woman, that his daughter, who was my age, told him off because it was politically incorrect and how it was a lad's environment and couldn't be doing with changing his behavior. One where the door buzzer didn't work and only a passing employee managed to let me in as the interviewer hadn't given her number. During the interview, she said she'd just taken over all the aspects of the business and fired about 4 warehouse people without warning, as they weren't 100% occupied at all times and just told him it was time to go. One who had a lot of negative reviews online as a retailer about how he cheated his customers. When I got there early and was preparing, a member of staff came out and knocked on my car to tell me to come in. They made me do a test that was essentially free labor, and the interviewer asked me terrible questions that didn't cover relevant experience, made sexist comments about how he didn't want to hire women who would just sit in the office and drink coffee all day. When I challenged him about the company's reputation, came up with conspiracy theories about competitors paying to ruin his business. He had fired someone that week for being an addict and someone else who came in trying to improve the business. As anyone who told him how to run it could F off. And that's only some of them. Story 8. Honestly, red flags you should look for. Number 1, if the positions they're hiring for are generally entry level, but the company's hiring tenured people to fill them. It means the company has a horrible training program. We're going to have a ragtag team of incompetent coworkers. Number 2, if the interview consists solely of, tell me about a time you, behavioral questions, run. If a company's looking for excellence, they'll add in technical questions. See above for the reason. Number 3, if early on in the interviewer goes from interviewer mode to promoter role, trying to convince you to take the job even before it's offered, see number 1 for the reason. Number 4, honestly, this is solely my own observation and it'll sound far out there, but based on my observations it has played out, get there early and visit the bathrooms. You don't have to go in, just find a seating area not too far from the restrooms and observe the passersby going to and from the bathrooms. If most people are simply going in and out for number 1s, you're cool. If you notice that most folks are going in and taking forever, you're looking at a stressful workplace. Number 4, or they just had a really bad lunch. But yeah, if I hated my job, I'd be in the can for a number of reasons. Story 9. I had a weird interview years ago. I was applying to be a trade sales assistant as the job details and duties seemed to match what I was already doing in my temp job at the time. The office didn't feel like an office. It looked like only interviewers were there and a receptionist that was extremely quiet and never looked at anyone. You didn't see other workers or things going on, which I thought was strange. Red flag number 1. It didn't feel like an office, especially since I've worked in a few. They have a certain way they're set up to be appealing to clients, but also people running about busy and talking. I saw none of that. It didn't feel professional. I've worked in startups, but even then they had this feeling of people working and being productive. I was in an interview with a woman and she asked me one or two questions, then suddenly went into this huge pitch and I couldn't understand anything she said because she was talking super fast. I picked up words like, "soon you'll be a manager before you know it," and stuff like that. In my eyes, when you talk so fast about something like this, a pitch or important details, they're hoping to miss something. My mental alarm bells went off after that. I didn't hear a single thing about my role as a trade assistant. The person they apparently needed for their company? Red flag. I knew that since my job description never came up once, they were not actually looking for what they claimed online. I said thank you and left. Within 2 hours, I got an email that I'm good for the job somehow and I needed to come in again Friday that week. I sent them an email saying I must decline as I was no longer interested in the position. Never heard back from them again. When I checked Glassdoor and a few other sites, I realized this company has a habit of bringing people in with these job positions in LinkedIn, but in reality, according to the claims, they were taking prospective employees on the street to do commission-only based sales. Like wearing a uniform and standing outside to hand out flyers, no matter what you applied for. Even if you applied as a receptionist, you did this. I reported them on LinkedIn right away as they were lying about these positions. So yeah, the red flags were how they seemed to be holding back info when I was there, and I had a gut feeling something was wrong, not to mention the interviewer was giving off warning signs. Story 10. Had a job interview at a game studio. Wasn't a dream job or anything, but my company was having troubles and I was sure I was going to lose my job soon, so I started looking for work. The whole interview was conducted by their managing director, who was no developer and had no real knowledge of game design, with their lead game designer sitting there as well, but not really saying much. In all my life, I had never had a more awkward interview. The guy was actively trying to make me feel insecure, and it was clear that he was immensely pleased with himself when he managed to unsettle me. We proceeded to talk about salary, and he told me to name my price, but I should know that he has a maximum salary and that if I asked for more, I wouldn't get the job, because he doesn't haggle. The smug little booger then proceeded to beam at me across the desk, and you could see that he was super proud of himself. Didn't get the job, but some friends of mine ended up working there. Turns out the guy was a supreme a-hole who was also very incompetent. Who would have thought that someone who thinks the best way to lead a job interview is to bully the applicant would turn out to be a massive and really bad boss? Should have made a video game about him. Looks intimidating, but is actually easy mode and difficulty. Story 11. I work in dentistry. Here's some red flag situations I've experienced. Number 1, my first job after graduating from college and getting my license. The dentist hired me, and on my first day said, "Since you're new at this, we're going to pay you at an assistant salary until you prove yourself." I'm a registered dental hygienist. Number 2, dental office personnel told me that nobody took breaks or even stopped for lunch because everyone in the office decided years ago that they would rather work through lunch and get out earlier, which never happened. Number 3, office personnel referred to patients by the cost of their treatment plans, i.e. instead of "Mrs. So-and-so is coming in today," it would be, "That $10,000 treatment plan is coming in today." Number 4, I was asked to take a Scantron-type personality test during an initial interview to see if I was a good fit for the office. This goes hand in hand with the dental offices that, for some reason, use Scientology principles to run the office. Number 5, asked if I could do a working interview. Never agreed to this. It's the dentist's way of getting free work. Meanwhile, you're unprotected as a non-employee. It's inappropriate to work on patients that aren't your patients. Number 6, arrived at an interview only to find out it was a group interview. We had to watch a 10-minute PowerPoint about the dentist, then take a quiz about his life. Number 7, been interviewed by an office manager or offered a job without ever meeting a dentist. Who are you really answering to in the office? Who's responsible for the patients? I love what I do, but I've worked for some seriously shady people. Of course, the best guy I worked for had the nerve to retire. Story 12. When the interviewer is actively telling you how much the job sucks. The manager of the Domino's who was interviewing looked like she was ready to cry during the whole thing. I knew right then and there I wasn't going to be there long. She informed me during the interview that it's just like high school here, aka people were immature and nobody was getting 30 hours because then upper management would have to give them benefits. I got the job and she quit on my second day. I hadn't even been trained and my only shifts were during the afternoon rush during the height of the pandemic. 4 out of 5 of the people who were there when I first started working there either quit or were let go over the course of about 3 months. My paycheck was late several times. One of our drivers was regularly allowed to sit in the back room folding boxes for an hour during the rush because he had to charge his ankle monitor. Essentially, he wasn't doing his job when we needed all the drivers we could get. And to top it all off, I got fired for getting close to 30 hours. They claimed it was because I'd had multiple warnings about my performance, even though I'd never heard any complaints or comments or anything about how well I was doing. I was on time every day and was responsible for training everyone who came after me until I got let go. Again, some guy sat in a shift and was fine, but I got let go because I kept asking for more hours. 2 out of 10. Would never work at Domino's again. Damn, that last one rhymed. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.